Well, let's see. Shall I start? Can we? Hello. Hello. Thank you for joining us for our latest webinar, where we will be discussing the digital aspects of delivering integrated projects. My name is Sebastian, Ailioie, and I'm head of digital at ACE. This webinar touches on the importance of core disciplines of successful delivery in information management, program management, and production management. It will look at the consultancy role in delivering projects which successfully integrate expertise from across the supply chain and work in close collaboration with the ultimate asset owner. Please don't forget this is a two-way conversation, and you can ask questions at any point during the webinar using the chat window in the GoToWebinar software. We will do our best to answer as many of those questions as we can. I'm joined here today by Peter Vale, Engineering Information Manager at Tideway, and Marzia Bolpagni, BIM Advisor with Mace. Peter, Marzia, would you like to tell us a bit about you and your work?
Hi, yes, my name is Peter Vale, and as Seb said, I'm the Engineering Information Manager on Tideway. So Tideway is the new super sewer construction project. I've been in the role for about 4 years, and my responsibility is I own the sort of BIM strategy for the project and all of the sort of digital deliverables that come from the contractors. And then as Tideway, I also represent, as part of the Digital Build Britain infrastructure client group, looking at working with government and Cambridge in delivering digital transformation across the infrastructure industry.
Yeah, good afternoon. So I'm Marzia Bolpagni. I work for Mace as a BIM advisor. Mace is a construction consultancy company. It is in the industry working worldwide. So we cover the entire life cycle. So it's good also from a digital point of view because we see how the data are managed from the early beginning to then during the design phase, construction, also facility management. I'm also ambassador of the UK BIM Alliance. I will say something about this later on. I'm assistant editor of the BIM Dictionary, and I'm leading a group of experts from 11 countries at European level at the European standardization body, SEN, TC442, on building information modeling, and in particular on the topic of the level of information need, that also I think that we will speak about later on. So let's say something about the UK BIM Alliance, for who of you that are not yet familiar with it. So what is the UK BIM Alliance? So it's not a closed group, but actually is about all of us. So all of us that are working in the industry and are trying to improve the way that we deliver works. So is led by people in the industry for the industry. And so these are the key part, the fundamental of helping the UK industry on the digital transformation journey. So it's really led by trust, independent leadership, mobilizing the community, enabling practical implementation, and having a common understanding, a common approach, and one voice. Here is a diagram about the structure of the UK BIM Alliance, so to have a better understanding. So there is an executive and a strategic team, and it is supported by a non-executive directors, the governance and the strategic advisory group, and is supported by the operation team, and also there is the engagement and the implementation groups. And this is also part of the Building Smart UK and Ireland. So here you can see that in the engagement part, there is the communities, the ambassador, the standard technology group, and the patrons and sponsors and affiliation. And in particular, I'm ambassador of the UK BIM Alliance. This I think that is quite interesting for all of you that are listening, because maybe you work in UK, but you don't know that there are all these communities group in different regions in UK, and also covering different topics. I think also Peter will say something about BIM for water.
Yeah,
that So it's really about, you don't have to feel alone in this digital transformation. There are really good initiatives that are going on. So if you are interested, you can get in contact with your region and the representative there. And also, if you are working a specific topic, it can be helping clients, it can be highways, it can be rails, it can be, again, water, all the legal part. Really, there are groups that can support. And then there is also the standards group that's trying to understand what these standards are all about and how we can use in practice. The technology group also is good to know that there is a group that is trying to discuss and to make this BIM business as usual. You can see different companies that are working together on the technology group. As I mentioned, the Building Smart UK and Ireland now is part of the UK BIM Alliance. So if you are interested in these activities, you need to refer to the UK BIM Alliance. So where to start, how to get informed about the information. So there is a website, you can easily type UK BIM Alliance, and I suggest you also to subscribe to the newsletter so you can receive the information of what is going on and to be updated. Latest project, so here is a list, upskilling. So this is a briefing paper that you can download for free on the website. Going digital, and a report on the product data. So these are resources that are available online, and that you can assess and then you can discuss with your team and to see how this can help you in your digital journey. Also a report on the legal aspect of building information modeling, and also another useful reference in using play language. I think that later also we discuss about the importance of using play language. Briefly, we are in a transition period regarding the standardization. I don't know, there are already published standards of building information modeling at international level. And recently, the ISO 906050 Part 1 and 2 have been published. And in UK, there is a collaboration between BSI, the Centre for Digital Great Britain, and the UK BIM Alliance in order to help the industry, in order to explain what's changed and how to implement these in projects. So here you can see a diagram of the different standards and the different publication strategic paper that have been published, that are available. And now you can see that at the end of 2018, the ISO standard have been published. So here you can, for who of you that are already familiar with the previous standards, you can see that now part of those have been included at the ISO standard. I think that that are different standardization level. At national level, here in UK there is BSI. At European level there is the CEN. At international level there is the ISO. So these are now BSEN ISO standards that incorporate what was included in the previous standard that were published in UK. So here again, that is a collaboration between 3 different organizations in order to help the UK industry in moving forward on these international standards. So now different companies that are involved in these standards, and so creating a guidance for the industry. Here is that what is next. So they will be published. The second part of the guidance will be published, but this is not a closed shop. So if you're interested and if you like to take part, here there is the the email in order to join this this group in order to write the guidance to the ISO 906050. So these are the other projects that are on their way from the UK BIM Alliance. So as I mentioned, the guidance for the ISO 906050. There is a project more related to infrastructure and the requirements that are needed when speaking on infrastructure projects. And then the development of individual qualification on the behalf of the Building Smart chapter UK and Ireland, and then a paper from BIM accreditation. So again, if you are interested on this topic, you can get in touch. These are also the references on, so you can join the Slack channel on Twitter, by email, and as I said before, you can join the newsletter and of course the website. So I hope that this information can be useful for the people that are listening that maybe were not familiar with all these different projects that are available. Yes.
Okay. If that's all from you, Marzia, then Peter.
Well, the first question that was posed was how can technology better support integrated teams? Back in March, we actually had a breakfast roundtable on this actual topic hosted by AceNet, where I was asked to provide some examples of where things are actually happening. So what Marzia has shown you is that there's a lot of sort of groundwork and frameworks in place and people doing great things. But the reality is that we need to get those sort of case studies out there to actually prove to everyone that, you know, what we talk about does actually exist and can be proven to be a better way of working. So at that session back in March, I tried to highlight how we are using technology, because technology has been around forever, and you know, technology is there to support people. And actually, is how do people work better with technology is I think going to be a lot of the sort of discussions that we're going to have later about what stops us from really truly realizing it. So in our regard as a client, we have a contract, an NEC contract with our consultants, which imposes a sort of pain gain and a collaborative approach. But in addition to that, we also created something called an alliancing agreement, which is, I suppose, as close as you're going to get into sort of the partnering agreements that are coming out of Project 13 and NEC 4. But what that did was an engagement of all the various parties to really take strategic decisions. So it was represented by our client, Tideway, our investors, as well as all of the contractor JVs were represented to make some strategic decisions. And one of those decisions that happened early on was, as a client, we said, could we build this project quicker? And in fact, could we challenge the supply chain to deliver it 2 years quicker? And the reality of that is that, you know, you cannot build something quicker. You can only dig so fast. But what we can do is we can look at, during, especially the example I gave during the design phase, is how we can use technology, how we can use new methods of working to really realize those sorts of efficiencies and better collaborative ways of working. And what we really moved away from is during the design phases, we were focusing more on what we would call model-based deliverables rather than the more traditional 2D drawings, in that the drawings in fact are really just cuts of that model, but those drawings have to be created, have to be reviewed and approved internally by the designers before they are then shared and issued to the contractor client for approval. So the idea is, how do we achieve that? So we're in multiple locations, we need to collaborate. So we did this idea of collaborative BIM Wednesdays, where we would get everyone together to share. Now the difference there is that the client was involved at that point. So this is all about bringing everyone together as a sort of a partnership. So we actually get to see as the client what the designers are seeing, what problems they're experiencing, such that it's not a commercial decision that the client is there. It's actually a decision that we can try and make that process efficient, so we can iron out problems such that the client doesn't see something for the first time. It's actually they've been involved in that discussion, and that means that they were able to sort of cut 30% of the time wasted in issuing, reviewing, and then having to reissue again, to the point where actually we were getting about 76% of our packages accepted first time round. How do we do that? So as a client, we ask them to create a common data environment, and that is the systems, the technology in place to actually deliver it. So as a client, we defined what the outputs were, but we didn't actually encourage, well, we didn't tell the contractors what software to use or how to use it. What we asked them to do, and it comes back to what Marzia was talking about around the BIM, is that the BIM execution plan that they delivered to us to explain how they were going to deliver what we've asked for, then really relied on the sort of expertise, knowledge and capabilities that that contractor and their designers had. So they should be using the software and the tools that they are comfortable with using to remove the sort of barriers that we would have in that if a client imposes some software that supply chain hasn't had experience of. Now, if the client's not then willing to then invest and pay them to be trained up, there's an expectation of a learning curve and a potential for things to go wrong. And going back to that whole process is how do we capture the lessons learned? So I'm quite involved as a water company in BIM for Water, and BIM for Water have a separate working group around how do we capture BIM benefits and case studies. And this exact example is actually on the BIM for Water case studies website, looking at the wider benefits that came from that exact exercise. So rather than going into the detail and providing a presentation, I would encourage you to look at what Marzia shared earlier and actually go out and find what information is there, because although there's lots of groups specific to different elements of the sector, a lot of the problems are pretty common across all aspects, and it's how we bring that together. And some of the wider benefits that were really in those case studies were looking at reduced design delivery, about being able to deliver digitally 30%, and actually it's the hard evidence that back it up to show how we did that. Reduces the ambiguity in information transfer. If you have good processes in place and structure and an automated audit trail, you can start trusting the information rather than relying on individuals making a decision on something. Automate where you can automate, and I think that's really the push that we need to be looking for to be efficient with what we have. And then looking at the fact that as a client, to get a 3D digital twin, you need to produce 3D information. So as a client, we impose that, but the benefit you have is if you get the building blocks of 3D information, is that you can do so much more with it. So we then started looking at applying 4D, not just around program, but also around health and safety, taking that same model to apply it to our TBM to ensure that we can provide very good health and safety training to people without actually taking them to an unsafe environment. And it's really that you can realize so much more innovation in that if you have those building blocks, you can get on and do lots of great things. And I think rather than just what we talk about and do, there's lots of it going on out elsewhere, and that's really what the BIM Alliance is taking what the government implemented as the sort of what was the BIM level 2 and the construction strategy back in 2011, to then move away from government to move to the reality that the supply chain need to do this. And actually that's what the BIM Alliance is there to try and help and encourage. And I think what the discussion later will start talking about some of the blockers and the realities, it's not an easy journey to take. So I'll leave that there around, how we've used technology to really look at how we can support integrated teams, and see if Marzia wants to add something to that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you started to touch some key points. I would like to start saying that yes, it's not an easy journey for anyone, but we need to start, and we need to understand that it is for everyone. It's not just for technical people, because we think that the implementation of technology for some people is they're afraid of what is going on. Maybe this is too difficult, and it's not for me. I can continue to carry out my job in the same way. Why I need to do? Which are the costs and so on. So there are different ways of implementing technology and supporting the team. I would like to start with the simple thing that actually I think that everyone can do. So we receive every day a lot of emails, and actually if you have only one day off, you open your email box and there are 200, 300 emails. So is there a better way of exchange information? So we need to use technology, also starting with these basic things in order to Or for example, if we need to agree on a meeting, instead of sending emails, why are you free, or are you free this day, and then another email say no, I'm not available, and maybe there is a group of 15 people. You start to using your time in not an effective way. So because just to find an appointment to meet on each other, you can spend maybe 1 hour to find a common day. Instead, there is the technology that can help us. There are free tools that are available that can connect automatically with your calendar, and then you can select the day easily. So in my team, and also, for example, as I mentioned, there is the Slack channel for the UK BIM Alliance. So what is Slack? So is an app that you can have on your desktop or on your phone, and then you can exchange information in a quicker way and have a history about what has been agreed. So instead of sending emails, say, oh, okay, yes, thank you, and maybe there are in CC a lot of people, and they start to be, confusing. We can use these tools in order to exchange information. Then when we move instead to the project to create the models, we need first to understand what we would like to achieve. So this is also part of my work at European level, on the level of information needs. So currently we defined our need when we need to model using the LOD concept, but actually sometimes it's quite confusing. What is LOD 3, LOD 4? There are some references, but if we need to achieve different purposes, so for example, if we need to do cost analysis, if we need to do energy analysis, if we just need to do visualization, we need different information, both from the graphical point of view, but also from the data and also the documentation. So it's really important, and I can imagine also, Peter, when you did this workshop with the team that you met every week, to understand, okay, what we would like to achieve, and then which is the best way in order to get what we want. It's not just creating a lot of information and then that we cannot use, but then to focus on some uses, and then to do some tests first, and then to implement in reality. So it's really important to be focus driven. So to be lean and to understand which are your needs, and then to specify and to deliver in a digital way what is needed. And then you can start to see the benefits of this digital journey. It's not that putting everything in one model and then maybe you need to do energy analysis, and actually there are not the information that you need there, or maybe you are a project manager and you would like to know the progress of the project, and actually in the common data environment it's difficult to find this information because there are not a dashboard that allow you to extract the intelligence from all this exchange of information.
And to add, you've listed a whole load of different roles, and the reality of to have an integrated team using the technology is there in the background. The real problem is, how do you get those people to work together, and each have their own expertise, and it needs to be recognized that the project manager is good at project management but might not necessarily understand information management. So there's a realization that it's not led by those that believe that they're the ones that are in charge. It's understanding that every person has a part to play, and it's understanding what their capabilities and knowledge is, and leveraging that such that if there is a weakness in one area, it should be supported elsewhere, and to work together. And this comes back down to the sorts of blockers. It was interesting the breakfast session, going back, the second sort of discussion was led by Les Copeland, who was the commercial director from Rambo, and he started the sort of conversation saying there's two types of people, and there's Trekkies, those that like Star Trek, and those that like Star Wars. And everyone laughed, and it was like, well, what does that really mean? He said, well, if you look at it, you've got the sort of the Star Trek, where it's all about universal peace, and guns are on stun, and it's how we can all work in harmony. Yet you've got the sort of Star Wars environment where there's trade wars and destruction and empires and violence and kill and explosions. And this has come back down to the sort of digital as a sort of a method can be used to not only help but to hinder. And I think the hope generally is around the harmony, but the reality is, he came from a commercial perspective that, what the construction strategy in 2011 was all about is removing that aggression, removing bad behaviours and conflict. And we start talking about what the blockers are that are stopping us. And it starts with people. It starts with people not knowing how to collaborate with each other. So you can have a very, what I'd call rudimentary, poor contract that really isn't that good in the eyes of the law. However, if two people want to work together with a common aim, they'll do it. And the contract there doesn't get in the way. And this comes down to this idea that with multitudes of people all expected to work together, how can they then apply technology? Because there will be bias to one group or another. And the real problem is understanding your capabilities and who's involved, and then getting that message across to train them, to educate them to the point where that sort of level of ignorance is removed, and we can all start afresh with the idea that we understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're going to do it. That's the journey. And then understand where the failings are, and then start plugging those gaps. Because really, technology, if you have the perfect technological setup, but you have people that don't understand it, aren't trained in using it, it will fail. And vice versa, if you have the rudimental email system and you're using it really inefficiently, but you know how to use that software and you know what you want, you will maximize as much as you can from that software. So really, where we talk about technology has been from steam to now electronic. It's still technology. It's ultimately down to how people are going to work together. And there are blockers like commercial. We talked about language and standardization, that there is a sort of randomness out there. There's no common theme. And that's part of what the BIM Alliance and the original government strategy about coming up with what was termed as BIM Level 2, which was drawing a line in the sand and starting to standardize across industry around how to deliver during the design phase. And that's great, because BIM is very much still centric to, although it covers the life cycle, it's still very biased to design and construction, which is why at UK level, and this is now what we would call the industrial strategy, is looking at delivering the sort of what we now call digital transformation, the digital twin, which is the BIM Alliance are working with the likes of Cambridge University through the Digital Built Britain, which was always perceived to be the level 3 BIM aspect. And I know I'm talking, so I'll take a pause and give Marzia a chance to add.
What we are saying is really important. And coming back also to the Center of Digital Britain, I was part of this network, the DCOM network, on the digitalization of requirements, regulations, standard and compliance checking in the built environment. So is a report that is available also online, is free, you can access. So you're trying to understand how we can use technology in order to check the compliance between what we required, what we deliver, and the regulation. So is trying to improve the way that we do also the checking of the information, and doing the life cycle, and also coming back to the digital twin. Now there is a lot of discussion around this term, but what is this about? So having live information that then you can start to analyze and to understand how, for example, how people they use the spaces, how people they use the infrastructure, which are the consumption, in order then to improve and to optimize your performances. So you can this, for some people that maybe are listening, this seems too advanced. We are trying to figure out the basic things. So and you are speaking about this digital twin, but is the way that we are moving forward. So in trying to understand how we use the spaces and to use the data to do business intelligence and use data analytics and visualization. So as we were speaking, so making the decision based on evidences. So you need to trust the information that we have, because we are producing a lot of information, but can we rely on the information? Are we sure that these information are up to date? So we need to have also a process of quality assurance in order to be sure that then we can use in an effective way this information, because the client is paying for this, and they would like to be sure that this information can be used.
I see there's a question popped up where it says, I believe that at this moment more training is required and senior management should be ready to spend money. So you're right. So the ICE and Topcon actually did a white paper that was released earlier this year, where they really were looking at all aspects from senior management to graduates, to really looking at some of what the key breaking barriers are. And what was interesting is that 90% responded to say that new technology was definitely the key to success. But on the counter to that, 20% of respondents believe that their business was resistant to change. And really the top barriers really are around the costs to do this, and also the sort of corporate culture around adversity to risk and belief that change isn't necessary. And also this lack of buy-in and strategy. So you're right, it's not just training. Training is a key aspect, because I think the outcome is that if you have a skilled workforce, they will do what they need to do and they have that capability. And it all comes back down to having a digital strategy, which is where we start talking beyond the sort of BIM and the new concept of digital transformation. And it was interesting because the reality of that is that you need to be able to engage all levels within the business, not just senior management, because if you think of it, the analogy I've been given is it's like a jam sandwich. You've got the new blood coming in that in theory get technology, and the senior management will be told what they need to do and they get the examples, but ultimately it's that jam in the middle. It's the middle management and it's the people. So it's all well and good having buy-in and budget at the top end and having new blood coming in, but you need to get that message across to the masses. And it's the idea that yes, you can train, but you need to have a strategy to explain to them what is it that you want from them, what do you actually need to train them in, and this is where it comes down to sort of understanding what your staff capability and maturity is, and setting out the idea that you don't go for an aspiration that's far too far to ever achieve, but you get down to grassroots to understand that it might not be people, it might be the processes, it may be the commercial contracts that you're actually using, it may be that you don't provide training. And actually, from that same Topcon IC report, 44% said that they hadn't received any new construction or information training in the previous 2 years. So there is a reality that there is a commitment to invest, but that investment has to be backed up by some hard business cases. And this is why things like the BIM Alliance and others is all about sharing really the reality of how do you go from where you are to where you need to be, and those sort of building blocks to achieve that. So as part of the infrastructure client group, I'm working in conjunction with Digital Build Britain. I sit on the digital transformation task group that is made up of the sort of client side, where we're trying to understand as the owner operators, what is our digital strategy? Because ultimately we know our designers are using technology, but they need that guidance from the clients. They need to have good commercial contracts that support integrated and partnering working to really achieve it. So yes, training, definitely. It's just how do you do training? Because it doesn't mean that you've got to invest lots of money. It may be doing lots of brown bag sessions, lunch and learns, going out doing the gospel about why you're doing things, simple principles to get people on board. And a lot of that can be done without having to spend lots and lots of money. It can actually be done with actually ensuring that you know what you want to do and you go out and train your staff or measure what their capability is, and actually look that it's not necessarily training that you need to address. You've just got fundamentally the wrong software or the wrong mentality, or you don't have what I would call senior management invested in really seeing that digital is an important thing. So if we feel that digital twin, the digital is just as important as the physical, you need someone at board level that actually understands it, buys into it and is willing to fight for it. And that will include training, but that will also include investment in the technology, the processes, the ways of working, how you then change your commercial contracts away from price to more on quality, and accept the fact that you may have to pay a bit more to get what you want, but have that digital strategy to understand, first of all, where you are, where you need to be, and how do we then achieve that. And that's really quite key, and that's something that at the client level we're trying to work and engage through the digital transformation group, and then plug into Digital Build Britain, because they're coming up with the research and looking at the art of the possible. But the art of the possible can only be realized if the client groups can actually implement it and it's appropriate for them, which is why it's great to see at industry level that these groups are working quite closely together to try and come up with a plan. Now, that plan isn't going to be overnight. That plan for Digital Build Britain is a 30-year plan. However, there are quick wins that can be achieved in the next 5 years that we really need to be focusing on, and things like new ways, commercial ways of working with the Project 13, with the integrated project or NEC4 partnering agreements, where really there isn't an us and them, it's one group all out for the same purpose. But ultimately, you know, capability of the individual's staff and the sort of strategies really will help implement success.
Yeah. I think that this also one of the points is about the relation with academia and the research and development is quite interesting, because there is a lot of opportunities that we can take in working together with universities, and the Centre of Digital Britain is an example of trying to fill the gap between the industry and the academia, and working together in order to improve the way that we are delivering projects and working together. So one example, if people would like to start their digital journey or they want to improve it, one possibility is also to establish this collaboration with the universities and be part of this group where we exchange information about the current situation and how we can improve. So yes, I think that this is really good.
There's another question if we want to. Is it a challenge for an international organisation to implement technology within a time frame, having branches in different countries, again integration between architects, engineers? So you're right. So although I work on Tideway, I work with Jacobs. That's who my employer is, and that is an international organisation. And the realities are that every country, I mean, we are part of Europe still, but the idea is we follow a set of standards and health and safety requirements and legal requirements, and they will be different. But again, that's the nuance of how and where you're working. What we're talking about is the principles of using technology to help us do what we need to do. So, I mean, one of the common problems that came out of the session that we had was, you know, we are where we are because the commercial contracts exist. They are, for designers, they're very much around IP and their insurance. So until we fundamentally change some of the non-technological problems, because I think technology actually is the easiest part. You know, we're doing it well, but what we're not doing is joining it together such that the designers are working with their design tools, the contractors are working with their construction tools, and then we start going into the owner-operator, very much where we talk about facilities management, different models, different sorts of contracts, different levels of requirements, such that, you know, we talk about a whole life cycle, but those life cycles are broken down into individual sections. So within design, there will be different building regulations dependent on where you are in the world. And yes, there are some realities that, yes, you can design all around the world, but typically these big organizations will be regionalized into the likes of America or into the Middle East or to Europe, because the reality is that, you know, time frame means that, you know, if we want to work together and talk with each other, we don't want someone working at midnight and someone else working at midday. The reality is that we work as teams based on, and the example I gave with on Tideway was that it was all about how we could combine the designer and their subcontractors across Europe to work together through collaborative working, etc.
Yeah, I think that it is important when you're working in international organization across different markets to have common standards. So again, there are standards that are already available. So it's important to be familiar with this. And actually, technology can help where there are the discrepancies in order to map the differences. So we know that, for example, different countries, they use different stages, different classification. But if the important is to be aware about what is different, and then technology can help in order to support us to manage this. And then what is possible to find a common language, common processes, then you can reach that level, and then after that you need to find ways in order to be more specific on what you need to address.
Yeah, so we talk about technology and standardization. One of the key problems is that, across our industry, we all call things slightly differently, and there needs to be a sort of standardization, not just of our data, but our common language, about how we actually describe things. Because a lot of the problems is when you get people talking to each other, unless they actually are thinking in the same way or understand that a cup and a beaker and a vessel are the same thing, that's where problems arise. Software, technology is moving towards open platforms, open standards. We talk about, from a BIM perspective, and Marzia talked about earlier, is that we've moved away from what we would call our BIM level to British standards and PASs to now international standards. The 19650 is now replacing, which shows that, it's all based on best practice, but that's a requirement. Now, it's interesting at our sort of client level is that we're in the water industry, and I think you mentioned it earlier about regulations. Mm-hmm. And actually, one of the problems we have is that if you look at the sectors that we have at client level around owner-operators around water, power, utilities, when one of the reports that I did at the Digital Transformation Task Group was, because a lot of those are represented in that infrastructure client group, is looking at, do we need new regulations or soft regulations? And actually, the reality check is that there is a lot of inconsistency across the different regulatory bodies, where they themselves are looking at data and technology in slightly different ways. And actually, the quick wins are not necessarily to regulate, to tell the clients to do it a particular way to try and kickstart it, but actually starting to harmonize and create some consistency across the board regulator. And then at client level, so for instance, in the water industry, you've got supply chains that work with multiple clients. And each client is coming up with a slightly different skew of how they're numbering and how they're describing and how they're doing their assets. So each are good in their own rights, and that's a historical fact of legacy and development. But what we're really trying to understand with the idea of a digital twin is how can we start bringing them together? And actually, the best way to start is, are we consistently being consistent, such that if a client or a designer says that they are having a set of standards and procedures and classifications that they're going to follow, they need to follow them. Because if they can't follow them, we'll be in a better place if everyone is doing things as best as they can with structured data to a particular structure, because we can then join that all together and use APIs and clever translations to actually start building all this together. And that's around information management, rather than having everyone do it differently, but actually thinking they're all doing a good job. But actually, when you scratch the surface, you then realize that actually the data that you've got is pretty poor. It's not structured. And I think that's the reality check that we just need to be looking at. Yes, you can regulate it, but it comes back to having a strategy, having a responsibility that you value data as a real thing, as a real asset, and you start treating it as a valuable asset. And as such, that is embedded into sort of your culture, your profit, your investment, such that if you really believe that's what you want, you should be investing and training and actually making it clear that that's the outcome you want from it.
Yeah, so there is another question. So is there an opportunity for technology to join the sector silos in the life cycle? Is there a common denominator which crosses all stages that technology can capitalize and assist everyone? So it's a very good question. So there are, we know that there are a lot of silos across different sectors. And one example is how to link what we do in construction with the manufacture. So now there is a lot of, also from the UK government, a lot of interest into the modern method of construction. Yes, so the technology can help us in order to do this, but is the way that you use technology. I think that is one of the key points of our discussion today. So you need to know what you would like to achieve, to have clear in your mind which are your requirements and the different needs of, for example, different sectors, different players. And when we have this clear, then you can start understanding, oh yes, I can link this with that, I can exchange information between what we do in our built asset with how we use the built environment. So we can start to link the different data sets and where we find problems in their interoperability, then we can develop them if they are not there yet. But it's important to have this awareness about which are the needs in different moments of the life cycle.
Yeah, so we talk about different sectors. So it's not necessarily the technology, but it's the data and methodologies behind it. And we talk about the manufacturing and the aeronautical, how will they do better than construction? But then you need to strip back the hard technology and the software and understand, why does it work? Is it because of the commercial frameworks, the fact that they value the information? A good example in the aeronauticals, we talk about the sort of tier 1, 2, 3, 4. Those organizations, even at tier 2, tier 3, are still big organizations because they are doing very complex, high quality information that can be automated and reproduced. And then we hit construction. And then the reality of construction is that you can get to tier 2 and tier 3 and you could be down to a 2-man organization. And this is where you have the realities of, they are two very different sectors. So just taking the sort of the processes and the mentality of how people do it, you need to be a bit careful about how you apply them, in that you can't just pick something up, chuck it over the fence to the other area and expect them to get the same result, which is why we start to really break it down into why it was working and how you can take those elements and which parts of those elements would work in the corresponding industry, and then start focusing on those as quick wins, with the idea that you then start trading up. And that's down to things like, if they are small organizations and they really do not have budget or time for training, should the client or should the contractors who are there themselves clients to their supply chain, should they not be then investing or taking responsibility, or should it always being chucked up and chucked up and chucked up? And it's moving away from what I'd call lowest price, poorest quality, to best quality, which comes with a price. But the idea is, I think the journey is understanding what the true value will be of, if you actually ask for something and you get what you want, which is this idea of defining your requirements. In the concept of BIM, it's all about government soft landings. It's about bringing the operator and the facilities management on board to define the requirements. And you think that would be an easy thing to do, but it doesn't happen. Because if actually the final end game, if we start talking about Avengers and end game, if you understand what your end game is, then that's what you should be asking the supply chain to deliver. And this is, again, there's lots of inefficiencies that come from procuring the wrong information or asking for too much information, through construction of inefficiencies about, with, for instance, smart motorways. And the reality is, you drive along a motorway and you see work sites where you've got one person working and 6 people around him watching what he's doing. Fundamental things like that, we need to address to get right, because it's not a one solution, it's lots of elements that if we start picking away and fixing them, it might take time, but that will still ultimately give us, these real cost savings that were sort of proposed in the sort of government strategies and industrial strategies. And actually, how do we realize them? And we realize them by sharing best practice.
Yeah.
So And other sectors do it really well, but they don't share that best practice because even for them, that's their corporate benefit. So I saw an example around Formula One where they do all this amazing analytics with live monitoring with their Formula One, and then do you share that? Of course they don't share it. They'll share it in 2 years' time when it's actually old technology moving forward, but they're not willing to share it now. So this is a culture of how do we innovate? How do we open up and make sure that the good practices we have now, there's not just the good practices where it went wrong, because that's the bit. People are very good at sharing what they did well.
The Hollywood
but they only show you the shiny top. They don't show the iceberg of what was really necessary to get there so you could reproduce it as another organization. And actually the real how you got there was people will fail. And why did they fail? But unfortunately, organizations are unwilling to share the bad. They only want the limelight. And this is where, again, it comes back to, they have their own commercial interests for good reason. But what we're trying to move away is that we shouldn't be hiding behind those sort of commercial realities. We should be exposing ourselves, warts and all, to actually work towards ultimately a better future. And these are some of the fundamental ones that really people and human nature just get in the way.
Yeah, there are. Fortunately, there are also open, solution and people that they also organization that they develop and then they share with the wider community, because that that in that way people can build on the top. But then it's not the culture, unfortunately, of all the organization. I see more and more companies or community that they start to do this hackathon together. So it is amazing. So I don't know if you ever had the experience to be part of one of those or to see these people in action. It's really great that to see people from different organizations that they come together in order to solve a challenge, and then they share the results. So we need to have more of those. So there are other questions?
No, I think our time has run out anyway, and thank you to our listeners for joining us today, and to my two guests, Peter and Marzia. I hope this was useful. Please join us soon for our next webinars, and just check our website events page for more details about the upcoming events and seminars. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.